people would know.
We need to get a sign that you can pull on that'll say clap, silence. That way they'll know. You should just need to hit go. I didn't set it next door. I'm sorry.
Put it sideways. Joslyn, right?
Correct? Sengaku, Sengaku, if you're using the dominant name.
Gaku.
Gaku, Sengaku. San means three, Gak means teachings, the three teachings. We'll actually talk about that a little bit later. Sengaku. Gaku is like student, Gaksan. San is three teachings. Woo! Are you okay? Gravity's still functioning. I read a science fiction story where gravity stopped functioning. You okay? You okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Scared more than anything.
Welcome to ZENtalk. It's our weekly talk show format here at the Atlanta Soto Zen Center in Atlanta, Georgia. We're part of a larger network called the Silent Thunder Order, some dozen or so centers around the country and in Canada. And each week we broadcast an interview with a guest, posted on our Facebook page, YouTube, archived on YouTube, I think, and live streamed on Mixler. So the whole point of this program or this show is to bring forth people who are practicing Zen from all walks of life, helping to understand how they got involved in Zen, what is its importance to them, and by way of implication, what is the difference between Zen meditation and the other forms of popular meditation that are being promoted today, such as mindfulness meditation. So each time, it's only half hour show format. Each time we do not necessarily go into that level of detail. But by watching each of these segments from that are archived again on the internet, you can begin to get a picture of the broad spectrum of people who are practicing Zen. Zen is mainstreaming in America, coming from different backgrounds, and begin to appreciate, I think, what is unique, different about Zen. So tonight we are very fortunate to have a special guest. Sengaku is his Dharma name. It means something like three teachings, and he will explain a little bit about that to us later. He's here in Atlanta on Ango, which Ango is an old Sanskrit term meaning practice period. In the rainy days, the monsoon season in India, those following Buddha at that time, would retreat to the caves during the roughly 3 months of monsoon season. So an Ango consists typically, traditionally, of 90 days. And Sengaku is here on his third of 30-day, 1 month intervals to complete a 90-day Ango as what we call Shuso head student. And he is here training under my supervision, but he's also here giving practice teaching and completing the sort of practice path prerequisites, if you will, towards becoming an ordained or recognized priest in Zen. So without further ado, let me introduce Sengaku Dan Joslyn, who is currently residing in Falmouth, Massachusetts, and trained here for some years before moving to Falmouth. And tonight we will ask him to give us some insight into his practice path, how he came to Zen practice, what was going on in his life before that, something about his background and profession, which we think is important for you to understand, that people are coming at this, as I said, from all walks of life. And then we'll have some more, perhaps, incisive questions later. So with that, welcome you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Well, I'm a war baby. I was born in 1945. My father was
You're just a kid.
just a kid when I was born. He was stationed in England at the time. And so he was from Maine and my mother was from Georgia. Very different kind of background. So we lived in Maine for a while, then moved back to Georgia. Formative years, small public school, small town. My dad was a policeman. So the only thing worse than being a policeman's son is being a minister's son in a small southern town. But I survived. Decided to make the military career. I was an alternate at West Point. Did not go. Stayed at North Georgia College up in Dahlonega, which is an essentially military college.
When you say you did not go,
Mhm.
what is...
The way that works is that each year you have to reapply. So as an alternate, I had to have the first person not decide to go.
Oh,
So the next year it was another competition
to West Point.
to West Point. And then each year that goes by, you have to start over as a freshman, as a plebe. So by the time my third year rolled around, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to continue to
In
do
my generation, which was a little bit before yours, to go meant you were going to Vietnam.
Well, I can talk about that in a minute, but
Okay.
so just very quickly in terms of that, when I graduated, I lost my commission because of a medical condition, and then I was drafted.
Not bone spurs, right?
No, this was something called rheumatoid spondylitis,
Okay.
which is difficulty with sitting, by the way. So that's something I've had to overcome. So I was drafted and then had a second deferment and went to graduate school where I fell in love with anthropology.
Hmm.
So
Did you marry?
I married
anthropology?
shortly thereafter to someone who was quite wild. So it worked out very nicely.
I think I know her.
So back to Georgia for a brief period of time, then went to North Carolina where I taught at East Carolina University.
What did you teach?
I taught organizational sociology.
Can you
It
tell us a
the
little bit
equivalency
about
would
what that
be,
is?
The equivalency would be social psychology, industrial psychology would be two terms that others may know. It's essentially looking at, from a design standpoint, organizational structure and function. So it was a good area for me.
Okay. And I understand when I met you, one of the things we did was we went to Troy University in Alabama, their home campus,
Right.
and we gave some talks there. And I understood that you, at that time, you were consulting with them and helping them to expand their presence around the country and around the world in different campuses. So that occupation you were in, or that consultancy that you were in, became very expansive in that sense. Is that correct?
It is, yeah. Over 35 years or so, I worked with a couple of hundred different organizations, mostly colleges and universities, but other large nonprofits as well. United Negro College Fund was a client. Worked with them for a number of years. I actually taught and was administrative at a historically black college here in Atlanta, Clark College, which is
Okay.
now
Yep.
Clark Atlanta University.
Yep.
Because not going to Vietnam, I got involved in the civil rights movement. So shifting gears,
That's
I
in it.
found myself
Let me
going
stop you there for a minute.
sure,
That's a very interesting construction. Did you hear what you just said?
yeah, shifting gears.
Not going to Vietnam, I got involved in the civil rights movement. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, what am I
I don't
going
think
to do?
too many people would put those two
Well,
together in the
let me
same
put it,
sentence.
well, maybe that's quite important because I was going to Vietnam because all of my friends were going to Vietnam. All my classmates were going to Vietnam. My roommate was killed in Vietnam. I felt that that was my duty at the time. I was not particularly in favor of what was going on, but that was secondary to what I considered my duty. So when that fell through twice, I found myself quite despondent. What am I going to do now that my whole life was not coming out the way I
you
thought
were
it would be?
deferred from Vietnam? It fell through twice?
Mhm.
You had deferments or?
No, well, the deferments essentially with medical disclaimers.
Yes,
So,
yes, yes.
It would have been a very difficult time if I had to be out there doing the things that because of my conditions, my back. So that then put me in a position to kind of think about what I wanted to do at the ripe old age of 22. What I'm going to do with my life, and then graduate school and moving forward with sociology.
Just
and
as
anthropology.
an aside, I'm a little bit older than you, and I was pretty sure I was going to Vietnam. And we had a lottery. We had the number. They had the draft at the time, which
Sure.
we no longer have. We now have all volunteer army today. But I was deferred, I think, 3 times. Once as a student, once the fact that I was married, and once that we had a child by Kennedy, the Kennedy administration. But I was ready to go. I thought I was going. It never happened.
Well, for me, I was going, and because of the medical condition, they withheld my commission, which essentially meant that I was then going to be drafted. So I was drafted, and then going through the induction, they found the same condition that I, by the way, had my medical records with me to show them when they went through the line.
So can you bring us a little bit forward from that time in your life to your Zen experience, and is there any connection there between all of those factors for you?
Of course.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. Well, one thing I left out is I was a Pentecostal holiness as a child. My family were evangelical. And so that's part of the story as well. So there are 2 important things. Pentecostal holiness believe in the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit as the primary of the 3 ends. So it's spiritual.
Of the 3,
Father, Son, Holy Ghost.
okay, of the Trinity.
The Trinity. So I became fascinated with the concept of spirit. So anthropology then allowed me to explore that in more detail, including Native Americans, but also around the world. That was quite interesting. The aspect of organization and how things were put together. So my major essentially was one of looking at how all functions become structuralized in order to maintain some kind of continuity. So I studied things like submarines, the culture of a submarine and how that works.
Including a yellow submarine?
No, at the time, I think that was just before that came out.
That was later.
That was later. That was a different cultural context. So Zen came along in the 70s.
For you?
For me, there were several books. Persig's book on Zen and Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Another book by Callaway called the Zen of Tennis. It was some, and then there's a great biography by Bill Russell, the great Celtic basketball player. It's called Above the Rim, where he talked about the concept of zone and being in a dimension that was extremely difficult to define. So all that kind of pulled me along. into the 80s and 90s. And then I started studying, reading, as we say, became very interested. In 2003, I started sitting with Phil Gable.
Phil Gable, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
He was here for
and Paula. And then I met you in 2003.
And that was at the Unitarian Church here in Atlanta,
Right, the
Cliff
big-
Valley
big
Way, the big
church.
one.
Cliff Valley. And started sitting with you here in 2003.
So take us to that time. What was going on in your life? What was impelling you, if I may use the term, to seek out Zen? And what were your first impressions? You had not done any serious meditation practice and in a group setting and so forth before?
I had studied yoga for a while, but that was simply on a dropping in, dropping out basis, more dropping out than dropping in. But that was recreational. It wasn't satisfying.
And so when you first started practicing Zen, in your mind, it was not recreational. What was it?
It was peaceful. I think part of my condition at the time was psychological, just a lot of things going on, making a lot of major life changes.
Such as
remarrying.
Remarrying at that time.
Yeah, having another child, 21 years apart, my two children. And as a result, actually my wife suggested I go. She knew some people at the Unitarian Church and one of the ministers there, along with Paula. So I started sitting there. And immediately I felt at home.
So for the sake of the audience, Phil and Paula Gable were members at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta, Cliff Valley Way. And Paula was a minister there.
Correct. She was an associate minister.
Associate minister. And they started coming here and holding morning meditation in our Zen Center here. That went on for some time. And they became part of our...
And then they left.
They left after a while.
I started sitting here.
So you, when they were gone, and you came here, you were stuck with us.
Stuck with you, yeah. Vice versa.
So tell us a little bit about that experience when you first came to Atlanta Soto Zen Center. How did that resonate for you? That's a horrible word to use. I guess it's so overused. But how did that fit for you in your context at the time?
It set with me well. I was traveling a lot in my work, but I found the morning sit. There was a very eclectic group at the time. I sat next to a bus driver who just got off, and the bus driver was there in his uniform, and I was sitting over here. It was just a very different kind of congregation.
So by the morning sit, you mean it was early, like 6 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, it was 6 o'clock. Sitting.
A bus driver was just getting off his shift, would come and sit, and you would come and sit.
I was coming in, and so that felt right.
It felt right.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
When you do something and it seems to be deeply felt, what we call heartfelt, there's nothing that compares with that. It's a very intimate feeling. And over my practice in Zen, that has evolved, deepened, but initially it was there. So it's not like it was something I was looking for. It was like something that found me. When I came in, it just presented itself. We use that a lot, as you know, in explaining how people react to Zen. So that was the process that was going on.
So let's shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
Then you became a very active member here for some time. You were on the board of directors. And there came a time at which you retired. You and your wife both retired, Susan. She's a psychiatrist. And you both decided to move to Falmouth, Massachusetts. And that was your retirement home. And most people think of that as kind of, that's wonderful. I would love to do that. But I think most of us who go through that find it a very wrenching,
It is.
can be a very wrenching experience. So catch us up with that a little bit about how you came to relinquish your attachments or your involvement in the community here in Atlanta
Mhm.
and uproot yourself and move to Falmouth. You and I at the time discussed it and said, let's make this the prototype, for how somebody who trains here can move on with their life and then reestablish a Sangha and a practice somewhere else. And this became the model for how the Silent Thunder Order
Correct.
can expand its
Yeah.
its network.
Yeah.
So that's a lot to cover, but
Yeah. 2007, we started working on the concept of the Silent Thunder Order. So
Right,
you and
right.
I and a couple of other people
Yeah.
in a kind of a rump group were
Right.
discussing that, and spent a couple of years sorting through it and then putting it out for people to look at. And
I had just come back from
you had
my
just gotten back
90 days in
2007.
Austin, my formal
Yeah.
training.
So that had an impact on how you saw things evolving,
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about that. So by the time I told you I was going to be leaving and everything fell into place, again, it's one of those things, wow, I'm really looking forward to starting my own Sangha. 1,250 miles away, nobody, I knew no one, and going there and so forth.
So what's the first thing you did?
First thing I did
It's part of our
was,
model, but
yeah, the first thing that I did was get in touch with the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Falmouth. I was a Unitarian before I started sitting here. The minister there, Harvard Divinity School graduate, and his minor was Buddhism. So immediate attachment there. He said, great, let's do it. He's since retired, and his wife has now become Buddhist. So it's very interesting in that regard. But a very welcoming congregation. People are very welcoming. So I set up shop.
you gave a public talk, I remember, and you had
I gave several
60
public
or
talks.
70 people came to the
Yeah,
first one.
Yeah.
Right.
I taught at the community college, taught a course. Went to the high schools.
I came and visited you the first time.
2011.
Which hurricane hit?
Oh, I don't recall, but I remember the impact. We've had two experiences, one with tornadoes in Nashville, the other with hurricanes at Cape Cod.
Big hurricane hit.
Yeah, and we were driving to Worcester, Massachusetts, James Ishmael Ford,
Right.
going to see Boundless Sin, his operation, because again, they had a residential program.
Right.
And we got to see that. That was before.
I think it was Helen. Hurricane Helen?
I don't think so. No.
Maybe not. No.
Anyway. And then we dodged tornadoes driving from Nashville to Atlanta after going 500 miles.
So now bring us up to present, where you are now. Obviously, you're here to complete your last 30 days of your 90 days Ango as a head student. We have a ceremony at the end of the month where you have to answer
26.
questions around a koan,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So Zen came to have an importance in your life at a certain point. And could you profile for the audience where it is now with you, how you see it now? You maybe, I would assume you must see it differently than you saw it in the beginning, but maybe not. It may be the same.
The difference is it's everything now as opposed to being a piece of something before. I saw
Everything instead of being a piece of something.
Yeah, and rather than say being a practice, it's now live. Rather than being something to do, it's now I'm doing it all the time. So it's that kind of different. In terms of my life now, it's interesting. We've talked about this a little bit, but I find myself being kind of a pastoral priest in Falmouth. Not a lot of training, but a lot of people in the Sangha, older people, and it's a wide range, but several older people that I've had to work with or assist.
And you've brought them along, and you've had several initiation ceremonies for your members.
Yeah.
So you have more people who are stepping forth, stepping up to be responsible for helping with the leadership.
I'm very proud of the group in that sense because they have. I couldn't be here if they didn't step up. This is 3 times now that they've stepped up and run around.
Allowed you the freedom
to come here. Yeah.
come here.
Pushing me out the door, saying how much better it is when I'm not there. Of course, you wouldn't know anything about that.
No, I wouldn't know.
But that was
The
part
title of Roshi, with those of us who've been doing this long enough, are given the honorific title of Roshi, which is said to mean essentially old and useless. Welcome to the old and useless
I'm
crowd.
certainly old and probably useless. But the other thing, just to top that off, is I found myself gravitating toward the alcohol and drug rehabilitation program. So I've been very much involved in that. I teach at several halfway houses involved in alcohol, also with abuse training. So I've been doing that now for about 7 years. This is the 9th year of our Sangha. So we, like STO, will be celebrating our 10th year in 2020. Just worked out that way. But so quite different, but still pretty much a thread there that I recognize.
So before we turn to the audience for any questions they may have, is there anything you would like to talk about that we haven't talked about, or anything you would like to share with our audience about their maybe trepidation about Zen, about why should they approach this, or with what cautions would they approach their Zen practice and so forth?
I think the question that we often get is, I need some help with my racing mind. I want to just calm down, that type of thing. That was me as well. But I think now it is more the idea of meaning. Meaning.
Tell us more about that.
Meaning is, for me, that which I do willingly because it is so much a part of my life, and I feel privileged to do that. It is a vow that we take.
What is that vow?
That vow is to, as a bodhisattva, to save all beings, to help others before ourselves, to work in that kind of activity.
And what's that got to do with meaning?
We all define our own meaning. What is our meaning? What is the meaning? What is the true meaning of life? Mm-hmm. By the way, when I was asked that, my answer was, it's wrestling.
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 Not wrestling.
Wrestling. Wrestling. That's a Southern term. Wrestling with the true meaning of life. That is the true meaning of life. Wrestling. So the meaning in the Sangha is coming to those steps after going deeply into the self. Then the process of forgetting the self is not forgetting everything. Rather, it is accumulating a sense of meaning. It is the formlessness of that. That to me is always wonderful. Every day is a good day in that regard.
Every day is a good day.
To quote Matsuroku Roshi.
Good. So with that, let me turn it to the audience, and let's see if we have some questions that anybody would like to ask Sengaku about what he has said or something he has not said. Don't be shy.
Growing up in the South, how was that, how difficult was it to relate to Buddhism coming from a Christian background?
You may find this hard to believe, but I'm the first Buddhist priest from Forsyth, Georgia. I searched the records. I'm the first one from Forsyth, Georgia.
Number one.
Buddhist priest in Forsyth, Georgia. I didn't have a lot of problems except when people would ask me, what in the world are you doing? And I would try to explain as best I could. But I've been lucky in that regard, that knows nothing stigmatic about it. I do have a lot of interesting conversations. We had a interesting conversation at LaGrange College, where we were talking to Methodists about Buddhism to students. And one person asked almost the same question: How do you enter into a conversation with someone that is very set in their religiosity? And my response was slowly, very slowly and carefully. So it hasn't been a real problem. Since you asked the question, I'm very surprised to give that answer. It really hadn't.
Now, when I left Chicago, the other guys and the other priests there said, "Does Southerners don't do Zen?" I said, "Well, that's the point, right? So we become the Southern school."
That's right.
Actually, not, right?
Yes.
Paul.
So I'm a Quaker and was raised, which is Pentecostal faith, liberal Pentecostal. I am curious as to how you map Zen onto Buddhism, because as I understand it, while Zen is Buddhist, Zen is a process that is not necessarily Buddhist. You can be, according to some people, you can be Zen and Christian. So how do you see Zen and Buddhism? Are they the same to you, or is one a process? Or could you talk a little bit about the relationship?
I now have a difficult time separating things to answer questions. I really have to kind of pull it apart in my mind. I've met so many people that if you were to put their labels together, it seems like an innocuous kind of thing, yet that's who they are by various people's definition. We decided, and since they supported, calling our Sangha the Falmouth Soto Zen Sangha. Yet when I talk to people coming in and saying, "Are you Buddhist?" I say yes. I suspect if they were to ask me, "Are you Christian?" I would say yes. And working with friends in synagogues in Hyannis that after the killings in Pittsburgh, I was leaving, and tremendous number of people. I was leaving and I spoke to the rabbi, and I said, tonight I'm Buddhist. Tonight I'm Jewish. He said, well, if truth be known, I'm a little Buddhist myself. And my response was, aren't we all? So Zen then, as what I see as a amplification of those things which bring it into everyday life for the lay person. If you think about the other Buddhist schools, that is not the case. There's still a bit of separation. So even in Mahayana, there is this separation. So I see these things in so many different ways, it's kind of hard to do that. For example, we had a person talking about the 12-step program here a number of years ago. So I can't separate 12 steps from the original 12 steps of Buddhism, Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Paths. So probably not a good answer, but that's the best I can come up with right now.
So just comment on that regard. In that regard, Buddha was not a Buddhist any more than Christ was a Christian, and so we say spit when you say Buddha because it doesn't capture it, right? And one of the teachers who came to our 2000 conference at Emory on
So,
Master Dogen, who was the founder of this form of practice in China, 13th century, was asked, we were talking about interfaith work. And one of the members of the audience asked him, can there really be a Christian Buddhist dialogue? And he said, no. He said, as long as they're Christians and Buddhists, there's no dialogue.
if we speak without our terminology, we speak without our icons and artifacts, if we speak without our predilections and expectations, what do we say?
Yeah. So Master Dogen said, think neither good nor evil, right or wrong, thus stopping the functions of the mind. Give up even the idea of becoming a Buddha. So from our perspective, if we simply substitute Buddhist for Caucasian, or American, or German, whatever other self-identity label we want to apply, it's just another label. So we've missed the entire point.
We get encumbered. We get so much stuff by definition of who we supposedly are, that until we are able to let that fall away, it prevents us from seeing the true self. I think, again, that's
Yep. So, anyone else? Don't be shy.
I'm still processing.
What else?
You said back then that in the beginning it was the peace, the peacefulness that you felt that kind of hooked you. What is it now that you still stick to it?
Say it again. What?
In the beginning, he said it's the peacefulness, the
Peacefulness.
the peace that he finds. But the question is, what is it now what makes him practice? What brings
Now
him-
that the peacefulness has gone away.
I'm not sure. Maybe it's still the same, but
Well, let me know what you decide about me here. Go ahead. The peacefulness is still there. There have been two events in my life that were really significant in terms of just a sense of relief and peacefulness. One was sitting in a 10 by 12 room, one wall of which from top to ceiling was a fish tank. So, and the chairs, this was in a museum, and there were just 3 chairs, and you would go in and sit, and it was acoustically wonderful, but you could hear the little sounds within the aquarium, and as you sat there, it was sensory perception. And that was an external inducement of what now happens within going out within. So as you know, that is very different. It's not something you have to go grab. It's something there that simply allows itself to come out. So it's still there, yes.
I might have missed something, but you said that you found Zen literature in the 70s,
Mhm.
and then you started your practice in the 90s, right?
Mhm.
So what happened in the 80s?
In the 80s, let's see, I was divorced, moved from North Carolina down here, trying to find a job. Found myself on the road a lot, had no real base. For 17 years, was kind of a real true traveling salesman. I would actually stay where I was working and not come back to Atlanta. So I was kind of a wanderer.
Did you have any sense of religiosity?
I still had my readings. I would still read. And because of the way I was working, the way I work, it's embedding myself into the issues of, say, a university. So I just get consumed by it. And so I become that. It's like an actor. You take on the role and you become that role. you have to. And so then when I got out of that role, I then was searching again. As self-employed, it's constantly looking for work, working, and then reporting on the work that I did. So it was a lot of time-consuming things. But by the time things started falling into place, I had a little bit more time, something we talk about a lot. I started my formal path at 59. So at 59, I started. So I had a lot of experience behind me and a little money in the bank, which allowed me to do that. But it took all that time to get to that point.
So I wanted to say something about that in our lay practice kind of Sangha community, we're not monastic, we're not pretend monastics. We look at the integration of Zen practice into daily life for people who have families, jobs, cars, kids to send to school, houses to keep from falling down, and so forth. As a very practical kind of matter, how do you incorporate Zen practice into your daily life? And you might want to speak to that a little bit. You're a living example of it. And starting in your late 50s or 60s, I started in my mid-20s. I was teaching at 2 universities in Chicago, and I met my teacher at that time. Was under a lot of stress, first marriage, couple kids, things like that. And he had come, Matsuoka Roshi had come to America in his mid-20s. Dogen Zenji went to China in his mid-20s. So the mid-20s seemed to be kind of a cardinal point when your brain finishes wiring, you become aware of mortality.
And my mid-20s was the Vietnam War.
Right.
That's where I was.
You were in the Vietnam War. But full-time Zen, dedication to Zen practice, I think in our culture, especially for lay practitioners like us, is kind of a retirement option. It's kind of something you can do toward the end of your life, and it can be very meaningful kind of activity once you've started taking care of business, taking care of family, as well as you can.
Using phrases like lifelong commitment doesn't mean much to me right now at my age. But the fact of the matter is,
because it's not that long anymore.
No, I don't worry about that. But essentially, that's what we do. We think about what we're going to do, how we're going to work it with spouses or significant others, and all of this has to be worked out, which is, I think, the way it should be.
It's a practical kind of design issue, really.
Very Zen in that regard.
Yep.
In the sense of here's the moment, this is what is happening, what are we going to do with it, kind of thing.
Okay, so we've run a little bit over time, and I think we've had questions from all. Does anybody else have something? Anything? Okay, so we'd like to bring one more forward. Come to the microphone, as if we had one.
So, I heard you mention how we can become encumbered by labels and I would say forms. How would you suggest a lay practitioner penetrate to the heart of the matter, past all of these forms?
Sit. Still enough, quiet enough, long enough. Time is an interesting thing. So we go back to Dogen again and go back to people like Katagiri and young Katagiri. Time shifts. And the ability to just be 1 minute Buddha, 1 minute Zen, 1 minute Buddha, that is, a universe. And it's just doing that again and again. And the next thing you know, as we say, all of a sudden I've gotten old with this, or this is who I am, or this is my life. So don't worry. Just sit with it. And as it comes along, you'll know. It'll greet you. You'll see the dragon. So just keep at it.
He said you'll see the dragon, by the way, for anybody who missed that. No, it's a very natural dragon. I'm glad you brought up that point. This is a very natural thing. We think people used to sit this way in tribal times. People used to become enlightened by nature. Now we have to go to great extremes. We have to set up zendos like this, sanctuaries against the madding crowd out there, come and sit facing a blank wall for long periods of time just to get back to being normal. So Matsuoka Roshi said, civilization conquers us.
Yes.
So anyway, welcome. Happy to have had you here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being on the program. We ask you to tune in again, track us on Facebook. If you go back and look at the prior interviews, you'll find out it's not all middle-aged white guys like us. Middle age is a kind way of
He was going to say Utes, but he's
Utes. It's not white Utes like us. But you will find there's a great deal of gender and age diversity, as well as ethnic, racial diversity, in those who are coming to Zen. Zen is not biased in the sense of gender or in any other sense. Buddha nature is not gendered. Zen is not Indian, Chinese, Japanese, or American for that matter. Cannot be caught in a cultural bottle. So even though once in a while it's a couple of Tweedledee and Tweedledum separated at birth, like us, the large view of the Sangha community of Zen practitioners today is extremely diverse. And we encourage you to go to the website and go to YouTube, look at some of the past interviews and try to get an overview. Encourage yourself to engage in this practice yourself. We think you will find you have no regrets and would be immensely rewarding for you. So again, Sengaku, thank you for being here. And you didn't explain your Dharma name. Sengaku means three
teachings.
Which are the...
It can be said in several different ways in terms of threes, but first we start with Sila, which is ethics, morality.
Yeah.
We talk about Dharma, which is the teachings of the Buddha and truth and development. Then we talk about paramitas. We talk about paramitas in terms of perfections, those things that we evolve into through these three stages.
Okay. And one of the terms he used earlier was the greater vehicle, Mahayana. And that means the greater vehicle, which in the vessel on which all of us are included. And these three teachings, Shila, perfection of precepts, paramitas, perfectings, and what was the third one?
Dharma.
Dharma meaning the teachings. These are all part of the greater vehicle, teachings of the Mahayana.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
My wife is waiting up there.
Uh-oh.
I'll tell her you made me stay like this.